Hello, world, and welcome to the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterland, coming to you from the vacation destination known as Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and this is episode 210. Labor Day has come and gone. The kids are back in school, but don't worry, summer's not really over. We've still got a few weeks left. The nostalgia train never stops running. We're going to keep it going this week, starting off by looking back 40 years at the discovery of the sunken remains of the Titanic. We're going to go way, way back in the day. Fitting for back to school, we're going to look at the battle in the 1990s between being cool but also doing well in school. There'll be a brand new top 5. These are the top 5 foods that are banned in the United States. Some of them will make sense, some of them I don't understand. And there'll be a brand new This Week in History and Time Capsule looking back at the official end of World War II. All of that is coming up right now on episode 210 of the In My Footsteps podcast. Yes, a lot has happened since we last got together. When I last spoke to you, I was on vacation. Speaking to you now, I am still on vacation. Now, by the time the podcast goes live, I'll be back at work, but right now, it's vacation time. It is also the time of year where my allergies start to kick in, so if you can hear it a little bit in my voice, that's where the allergies have started. It's so much hard work relaxing on vacation, I need to take this 5-hour energy and open it. Let's see if you can hear it. I think you could hear it a little bit. I promise there's one right there. There it is slamming on the desk. There's a certain amount of energy that I want to convey for these podcasts, so I can't let my allergies drag me down. But yes, it has been an eventful week, a fun week. We launched the When Henry Met Henry GoFundMe. I mentioned it last week. It has done really well in the first week that it's out. I was honestly overwhelmed a little bit by the amount of support, whether through donations or through sharing by family and friends. The first 2 people to donate to the GoFundMe were my oldest nieces, Kaylee and Emma, which, I mean, honestly, that says a lot to me. The belief in me, the belief in the project, it really is infectious. It makes me really excited to do the When Henry Met Henry short film, whether it's directing, producing. But it also gives me confidence in other projects going forward. If you want to donate, the link to the GoFundMe is in the podcast notes. If you're listening to this after, say, the 3rd week of October, don't go donate. The GoFundMe will be down by then. I also was able to spend a few days hanging out with one of my oldest friends, John. We did a few long walks, he and I and his wife, Janelle. It was a lot of fun, random jokes that made me think of the old days, including putting together this funny birthday video out on the beach for our friend Barry, where I kept John a secret, and I said I was going to send Barry a video of the sunset, and all of a sudden John's just there yelling at me. Those are the kind of things that I cherish at this point in my life. But we've got a lot to get into on this week's podcast, so before I dive into the meat of this nostalgia sandwich, let me take a moment to thank my Patreon subscribers: Lori, Mary Lou, Ashley, Kevin, Leo, Marguerite, Neglectoid, Crystal, Matt, and welcome aboard my newest Patreon subscriber, Dr. Shrimp Porto Chico. He has the best name so far of all of the people that have subscribed. Thank you for coming aboard. I hope you get to check out all of the bonus content that I have up there. At the end of this episode, I'm going to have a special kind of announcement for my Patreon subscribers, so stay tuned for that. You will want to hear that one. But right now, near, far, wherever you are, let's kick off the podcast by looking back 40 years at the finding of the wreckage of the Titanic, coming up right now on episode 210 of the In My Footsteps podcast. This will be an interesting segment of the podcast because it's almost like two different This Week in History segments crammed into one. Because it was 40 years ago this week, on September 1st, 1985, that the wreck of the Titanic was found. But yet we can't talk about the finding of the wreckage without talking about the actual wreck of the ship in the first place. It's interesting because when the Titanic was found, I was in second grade. I had just started second grade. And I actually have memories of this mission to find the ship, at least when it was found. So even though the Titanic went down 55 years before I was born, I do feel like I have a connection to the ship and its story. Let's start this off kind of chronologically. For those of you that may have no idea about the Titanic, which I know is probably very few of you, but still, I never want to assume that everyone knows exactly what I'm talking about. The RMS Titanic was a British passenger liner. It was built by the White Star Line. It was hailed as the largest, most luxurious ship of its time. The ship was constructed at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast. The Titanic measured 882 feet long, it boasted advanced safety features, and was famously described as practically unsinkable. Obviously, those words would come back to bite the builders of the ship. On April 10th, 1912, the Titanic set sail on her maiden voyage from Southampton, England to New York City. It was carrying more than 2,200 passengers and crew. The accommodations on the Titanic ranged from opulent first-class suites to modest third-class cabins, which reflected the social divisions of the early 20th century. Late on the night of April the 14th, the Titanic struck an iceberg in the frigid North Atlantic Ocean. Within less than 3 hours, the ship broke apart and sank in the early hours of April 15th, 1912. Out of more than 2,200 people, only about 710 survived. This was largely due to a shortage of lifeboats and inadequate evacuation procedures. The disaster shocked the world and led to major changes in maritime safety, including the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, or SOLAS. For the next 70-plus years, the Titanic was a myth and a legend. You had survivors that would tell their tale of what went on that night. Because at the time, in 1912, the ship, like I said, it was seen as virtually unsinkable. So the fact that it sunk, nobody could believe it. In 1958, a film was put out called A Night to Remember that was about the sinking of the Titanic. It is highly recommended. It's 100% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. Obviously, most of you know 1997, the film Titanic came out, starring Kate Winslet, Leonardo DiCaprio. That movie is 88% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes and made more than $2.2 billion at the box office on a budget of $200 million. Some of you might know this fun fact, but if you don't, this is one of those unbelievable strange coincidences. There was a book that came out in 1898, 14 years before the Titanic, called The Wreck of the Titan, which basically predicted the wreck of the Titanic. It was down to the name of the ship, the size, where it sank, when it sank, the month of April. It's mind-blowing if you read that book and just know what happened in reality 14 years later. That was kind of a speed run through the actual story of the Titanic when it was as a ship. So for 73 years after the Titanic sank in the North Atlantic, her final resting place remained unknown. Dozens of searches failed, which it was frustrating. The size of the ocean and the wreck's depth, which was probably more than 2 miles deep. Things started to change, though, in the summer of 1985. Since the disaster, explorers, treasure hunters, and scientists had dreamed of finding the Titanic. It was the holy grail. The survivors had given an approximate location, but the accuracy of navigation in 1912, being in the middle of the ocean, it's like, how could you predict or tell someone, yeah, we were here? So that left a wide margin of error. I was 7 years old when the Titanic was found, so I didn't know what it was until it was found, and it was a big deal. But according to my parents, my grandparents, for the majority of their life, they figured they were never going to find that ship. Efforts to find it in the 1950s through the late 70s used sonar, deep-sea cameras, manned submersibles, but they all failed to locate the ship. The challenge was enormous. The wreck laid beneath crushing water pressure at a depth of about 12,500 feet. The man who would successfully lead the mission was Dr. Robert Ballard. He was an oceanographer with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, which from where I'm recording the podcast, it's about a 45-minute drive away. It's on Cape Cod. That's why I feel a local connection to the Titanic. What's not widely known about Dr. Ballard is that his expedition to the Titanic was tied to a classified U.S. Navy operation. Ballard approached the Navy in the early 80s for funding to develop his Argo/Jason system, which was a deep-sea, remotely operated camera sled with live video capability. The Navy agreed to support his work on one condition. Before looking for the Titanic, Ballard would use the technology to locate and examine the wrecks of two nuclear submarines, the USS Thresher, which was lost in 1963, and the USS Scorpion, which was lost in 1968. Both of these submarines lay deep in the Atlantic, and the Navy wanted to ensure that the reactors had not contaminated the ocean. Ballard's surveys of the submarines in 1984 into early 1985 were successful. In return, the Navy allowed him to use his remaining expedition time, funding, and vessel access to pursue the Titanic. Ballard joined forces with Jean-Louis Michel and the French research institute IFREMER, which stands for Institut Français de Recherche pour l'Exploitation de la Mer. I apologize for my lack of French accent. The French ship Le Suroît first surveyed the target area in summer 1985 using sonar to narrow down the search zone. Then, Ballard and his team took over with the American research vessel Nor, equipped with the Argo deep-sea sled. Previous expeditions had made the mistake of looking for the ship itself. Ballard's team reasoned differently. When the Titanic sank, it broke apart, leaving a debris field that would spread for miles. Finding scattered wreckage like coal, boilers, furniture, that would be easier than spotting the actual ship. So the Nor's crew began towing Argo across the ocean floor in slow, deliberate sweeps, watching hours of grainy video on monitors. It must have been painstaking work and really boring at times. In the early hours of September 1st, 1985, Argo's cameras captured images of a massive boiler lying on the seabed. It matched those used on the Titanic. Shortly afterward, the sled transmitted haunting images of twisted metal, coal, dishes, and other debris. Following the trail, the team soon came upon the ship itself. The bow section loomed out of the darkness, upright and surprisingly well preserved, though draped in rust-colored rusticles formed by iron-eating bacteria. The stern section, by contrast, was a mangled mess from the violent breakup. The location of the Titanic was about 370 miles southeast of Newfoundland, far off course from the intended destination of New York City. News of the finding of the Titanic was announced on September 3rd, 1985, 40 years to the day that this podcast goes live. For the first time, the Titanic was no longer a mystery, and the discovery proved several key points: that the ship had indeed split in two before sinking, corroborating several survivor accounts that had long been disputed. It proved that deep-sea exploration with remote-operated vehicles and camera sleds was a viable method for locating wrecks. And it showed that the wreck of the Titanic was a graveyard, with artifacts scattered across the ocean floor, leading to ethical debates over salvage versus preservation. Over time, more than 5,500 artifacts from the Titanic have been brought up. They're scattered around the country and world in different museums. You can go to discovertitanic.com, and they've got pictures and listings of everything they brought up from the ship over the ensuing decades. I can remember being in my second grade class, and there being a TV that we watched some kind of a news report on. It probably wasn't immediately after, and it probably wasn't too long of a video, but I believe it had to do with the connection of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute and the finding of the Titanic. So it could have been PBS, the show Nova, or something like that. I remember being interested in the story of the Titanic and the pictures of this haunting shipwreck, but I don't think I fully appreciated the gravity of them finding it and the whole story of the Titanic until I got older. And yes, I saw Titanic in the theater 3 different times. I sat through that 3+ hour movie. The 1985 discovery of the Titanic wasn't just the solution to a great historical mystery, but also a turning point in oceanographic research. It began as a Cold War Navy operation and turned into one of the most famous expeditions in maritime history, finally revealing the resting place of the world's most legendary ship, the Titanic. This week in history, we are going back 80 years ago to September 2nd, 1945, and the official end of World War II. By mid-1945, the Second World War had entered its climactic final act. In Europe, the Nazi regime had collapsed in May, but in the Pacific, Imperial Japan still resisted despite staggering losses. On July 17, 1945, Allied leaders U.S. President Harry S. Truman, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin met in Potsdam, Germany. Their goals were to discuss post-war Europe, manage Germany's occupation, and issue terms for Japan's surrender. Japan's government rejected the terms of surrender, choosing instead to fight on, hoping for better peace conditions. Even as diplomacy unfolded, the United States was preparing a weapon that could change warfare forever. On July 16th, the Trinity test in the New Mexico desert proved the feasibility of the atomic bomb. President Truman, informed of the success of the test during the Potsdam Conference, saw it as a means to end the war swiftly without a costly invasion of Japan. On August 6, 1945, the U.S. dropped the first atomic bomb, called Little Boy, on Hiroshima, Japan, instantly killing tens of thousands. The city was devastated, and radiation effects would claim many more lives in the weeks and months ahead. Despite the destruction, Japan's leaders hesitated. On August 9th, a second bomb, entitled Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki. The same day, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan, invading Japanese-held Manchuria with overwhelming force. Facing the dual shock of atomic devastation and Soviet entry into the war, Emperor Hirohito intervened. On August 15, 1945, he made a radio broadcast, which was the first time the Japanese people had ever heard his voice, announcing Japan's acceptance of the Allied terms. The formal surrender came on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, officially ending World War II. Japan then came under Allied occupation led by General Douglas MacArthur. The occupation brought sweeping reforms like a new pacifist constitution, democratic institutions, land reforms, and the dismantling of Japan's military. War crimes trials were held in Tokyo, paralleling those at Nuremberg in Germany. Both Japan and war-torn parts of Asia faced severe shortages of food, medicine, and housing. Millions were displaced, and radiation sickness from the atomic bombings emerged as a grim, new medical reality. The end of World War II marked the start of a new era dominated by the United States-Soviet Union rivalry. The Soviet Union's rapid advance in Asia and Eastern Europe alarmed the West, and the possession of nuclear weapons by the United States initiated the nuclear arms race. This planted the seeds of the Cold War, which was going on all the way through my childhood up into the early 1990s. World War II claimed an estimated 70 to 85 million lives. The war's end brought relief but also left deep scars, both physical and psychological, on survivors. Obviously, I was not alive then. I'm sure the majority of you were not, but I'm very proud that both of my grandfathers, and I'm sure a lot of your parents, grandparents, fought in World War II against the scum Nazis. And that war, World War II, officially ended 80 years ago this week in history. Now it's time for a brand new time capsule. We're going to stick to the same day, September 2nd, 1945. World War II has just ended. What was going on in the world of pop culture on the same day? Let's find out. The number one song was On the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe by Johnny Mercer. This song won the Academy Award for Best Original Song in the movie The Harvey Girls. The song itself has been covered by a lot of heavy hitters, like Bing Crosby, Judy Garland, Rosemary Clooney, Harry Connick Jr., but Johnny Mercer's one is the only one that went to number one, and obviously the only one that won an Academy Award. The number one movie was State Fair, and you could get into the theater with a ticket costing 35 cents. This is a musical drama about a family's adventures at the Iowa State Fair. State Fair is the only Rodgers and Hammerstein musical written directly for a film. I couldn't find much in the way of information about its reception at the time. It made $4 million total at the box office and is 83% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. So if you like musicals, if you like classic films, you'll probably enjoy this one. The number one radio show, because there was no TV in 1945, was Truth or Consequences. This was a game show originally hosted by Ralph Edwards on NBC. It's a pretty simple premise. Truth, you have to answer some sort of trivia question, and if you get it wrong, the consequences are some zany stunt that you have to perform. The show was on the radio alone from 1940 to 1950, which I guess growing up with TV, it's hard to imagine having a radio version of a game show where they've got to describe to you what they're doing. But it did eventually end up on television and was the first show that Bob Barker hosted starting in 1956. And if you were around back then, September 2nd, 1945, you're super excited that World War II has ended. You want to celebrate by shopping? Well, I've got something for you. R.H. White's Housewares Carnival. R.H. White's is New England's most modern store, or at least it was in 1945. You've got sales on the famous brands of the time: Wagner, Wherever, Bissell, Pyrex, Stainless Ware, and many others. And don't worry, if you can't make it to Boston to get any of these amazing deals at the Housewares Carnival, you can call them or you can send them a letter with things that you want to order by mail. But you have to spend at least $1 to get the stuff mailed to you. And that'll wrap up another time capsule, another This Week in History. If you go to the supermarket, there's literally thousands of different products you could find on all of the shelves. But you will most likely not find any of these products coming up because these foods have been banned in the US. So let's start a brand new top 5. These foods you will not find in any supermarket in the United States. Well, I guess I shouldn't say none, because I can't prove it. I can't go to every single supermarket or little mom and pop shop and look for all of these things. But that fact aside, the brand new top 5 this week, we're going to be looking at foods that are banned in the United States. Back in episode 180, I did a segment on banned drinks in the United States. So this is kind of the sequel to that segment. Some of these in the top 5 and the honorable mentions will be fairly obvious why they are banned. Others will need a little bit of a deeper explanation, but I'll go through all of that. So as with most of these top 5, they're in no particular order. We do have some honorable mentions. And just because these foods are banned in the United States does not mean that some of you have not had them before. Because I'm sure a lot of you have traveled, so you'll have to let me know if you've had any of these and if you enjoyed them. So let's start off the top 5 with the honorable mentions, which I'll kind of speed through, but I'll give you the reason that they're banned. Honorable mentions for banned foods in the United States include mustard oil, which is not totally banned, but it is banned as far as a cooking oil due to its high erucic acid content, which was linked to potential heart damage in animals. Another honorable mention is sassafras. This was banned for commercial use in foods and medications in 1960 due to concerns about its primary component, safrole, which was found to be a carcinogen in animal studies. Another honorable mention is bird's nest soup. This is not technically banned, but the importation of edible bird's nest is, due to concerns about the nests possibly carrying infectious diseases, particularly bird flu. And the final honorable mention is haggis. This traditional Scottish dish was banned in 1971 due to having sheep's lung in it, mainly due to potential contamination during slaughter and butchering of the meat. So those are the honorable mentions. Have you had any of those? Well, let's get into the actual top 5. Banned foods in the United States, starting with number 1, raw milk. This is one that is not fully banned, but its sale is highly prohibited depending on where you are in the country. The sale of raw milk across state lines is prohibited due to potential health risks. Raw milk is just milk that has not undergone pasteurization, which is the heating process to kill harmful bacteria. So it's sort of like a hit or miss game where you could get raw milk and you might be fine, but then again you could get raw milk somewhere else and you could get sick with E. coli or salmonella. If you're really jonesing for some raw milk, you can get it in Arizona, California, Connecticut, Idaho, Maine, Nevada, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, and Washington. Number 2 is bush meat. What exactly is bush meat? Well, bush meat mainly comes from Africa, Asia, and South America, and it's basically any kind of wild animals that are hunted. This includes bats, monkeys, rats, porcupines, antelopes, snakes, frogs, elephants, giraffes. So it's pretty easy to see why this would be banned in the United States. I mean, who the hell's going to want to eat rat or monkey? And then the ethical things with elephants and giraffes. But it's also minimally processed. So it comes back to the diseases again, like with raw milk. Except it's even more serious with bushmeat. You could get things like Ebola, SARS, HIV. These things have been linked to bushmeat consumption. I'm fine with sticking to chicken and steak rather than monkey and bat. Although I did have an alligator sausage one year at the Barnstable County Fair. That's my going out on a limb with something unique. So no porcupine burger with raw milk on the side. Number 3 is shark fin soup. This is a more recent one with the federal ban on shark fin soup going into effect in December of 2022. This was through the Shark Fin Sales Elimination Act, which prohibits the purchase, sale, or possession of shark fins. The process of shark finning kills millions of sharks each year. Shark fin soup is an Asian delicacy where the cartilage of the shark fin is the main ingredient in the soup. Interestingly, the shark fin in the soup is more for texture and not flavor, as the soup's flavor often comes from the broth, which is often chicken or seafood based. So this one, much like with bushmeat with things like elephants and giraffes, it's more of an ethical thing, an environmental thing. I mean, there are plenty of other things that you can get at Asian restaurants in the United States where you don't need shark fin. I'll stick with chicken fingers and fried rice and beef teriyaki. Number 4 is cyclamate. Cyclamate was an artificial sweetener. It was said to be 30 to 50 times sweeter than sugar, which I don't know how they measure that. This was banned in the United States in the late 1960s due to increased occurrences of bladder tumors in rats that were tested. Interestingly, subsequent tests suggested that those findings were possibly flawed and that cyclamate isn't a carcinogen in humans. Despite these findings, cyclamate was never taken off the banned list by the FDA, which I guess is fine because seems like every 5 years there's some kind of new artificial sweetener. Saccharin, Sweet and Low, Splenda. What's the other one? Stevia. Maybe that'll be the next thing in a few years. Cyclamate will be retro chic. I said nostalgia's always a strong, powerful thing. Maybe there'll be an outcry for cyclamate. And finally, number 5 on the list of banned foods in the United States is casu marzu. If you are eating, I would recommend putting your food down right now. If you do not know what casu marzu is, it's a cheese, a traditional Sardinian sheep milk cheese containing live insect larvae, aka maggots. It's maggot cheese. Supposedly, these larvae break down the cheese's fats and give it a soft texture and an intense flavor. But seriously, are you going to eat a cheese filled with maggots just for the texture? It's like, really? I wonder who in the world thought of this in the first place. You know what would go good with this cheese? Maggots. It's like I know there are some foods that seem to be on opposite spectrums that go together well, like chicken and waffles. I never knew how much that would be great together. But nowhere in my mind did I ever think cheese and maggots would go good together. The big reason why this cheese is banned is due to the potential risks of fly larvae surviving digestion and causing intestinal damage. Yeah, did that bring any of you that were on the fence about trying this? Did that take you back? You talk about a tickle in your stomach with fly larvae that survived. Gah. Okay. Anyone that was eating, you can go back to eating now. I'm done talking about casu marzu. So that wraps up the top 5 banned foods in the United States. I am glad I don't take a lot of risks with what I eat, but we're going to move on to something that was just as risky as eating casu marzu. Maybe not. That was trying to walk the tightrope between doing well in school, but also being seen as one of the cool kids in the 1990s. So let's go back to the 90s and back to school. I was a teenager of the 1990s. I began high school in 1992. In the 90s, they were a strange and pivotal time for us teenagers back then. MTV still played music videos. You had Seinfeld, and then Friends coming along to rule primetime TV. Grunge fashion made it socially acceptable to wear torn jeans and flannel and look like you didn't care about how you looked. But for many high school students, the biggest social choice of the 90s wasn't about whether to wear Doc Martens or Air Jordans. It was whether you wanted to be one of the cool kids or focus on actual academic excellence. This was a topic that I had wanted to do for a while on the podcast, but I was having trouble figuring out what exactly I wanted to talk about and how to put together a segment about it. because this was actually something that I wrestled with in high school. Up until probably through my freshman year of high school, I was an honor student. I was pretty smart. Not to pat myself on the back, but I was borderline genius smart. I took my SATs when I was 13 years old. Johns Hopkins University paid for me to go take my SATs. They also wanted me to go to Genius Camp, which was super expensive, and my mom couldn't afford it. So the compromise was going to Kevin McHale basketball camp, which I did a segment on way back in episode 31, if you want to know how that went. But as I went on, it became more of a battle as far as working really hard in school, because it got harder the more I went along. You went from algebra to pre-calculus, basic science to biology and chemistry. And this was also around the same time that I bought my own camcorder. I spent all of my savings on it. So I wanted to be hanging out with my friends and making videos with my camcorder. So that's where this idea for this segment came from, was my own battles, towing that line. This isn't just a 90s thing. Teen culture has always had social hierarchies. It was just, I grew up in the 90s, and the 90s amplified that separation. Pop culture fed that narrative. You had movies like Clueless, 10 Things I Hate About You, and She's All That, which reinforced the idea that popularity and scholastic achievement rarely overlapped. Sure, you had stereotypes everywhere. The cool kids filled the bleachers at football games, while the smart kids filled the library after school. So those of you that didn't grow up in the 90s, maybe you're in high school now, what exactly did it mean to be a cool kid in the 90s? Boy, it's really subjective, but I tried to give some kind of a definition. So coolness in the 90s, I saw it as defined by a mix of style, attitude, and social presence. This could be anything like Jenko jeans, JNCO, Judge None, Choose One. That's what it stood for. I never had those. It could be things like chain wallets, frosted tips like a lot of the boy bands in the late 90s, backwards baseball caps, which I wore all the time. For girls, it could be things like crop tops, chokers, butterfly clips. The cool kids were fixtures at Friday night football games. They were at the pep rallies. They were at house parties. They knew the latest slang from Wayne's World or Beavis and Butthead. These kids would often prioritize social plans over studying, risking their grades for a weekend hangout. Sometimes they even downplayed academic ability for fear of losing social capital, like being a tryhard. That wasn't seen as cool. This was a real problem for me in the 1990s in high school. I had always had a whole bunch of friends, but as we got older into our teen years, the freedom became more. So what we could do kind of grew in scope. And at the same time, the schoolwork was getting harder. But we'll get more to me later. What was being a smart kid in the 90s? These kids were not usually the focal point of the yearbook's best dressed page, but they were often racking up honor roll certificates, perfect attendance awards. These students spent after-school hours at the computer lab, in academic clubs like any kind of science olympiad, debate team, math club. They would wear practical clothes rather than trend-driven styles. Think something like Gap khakis and oversized sweatshirts rather than whatever the latest rave-inspired gear was. These kids were preparing for college applications, often feeling pressure from parents to secure scholarships and top grades, and they also risked being labeled as nerds or uncool for showing too much enthusiasm about their schoolwork. We've all been teenagers, we've all been in high school, we all remember how other people's perception of you often meant more than what you were doing. Some people being a high honor student wasn't good enough if everyone didn't think you were cool. In the 90s, we didn't have smartphones. I only got access to the internet my senior year of high school. Social standing was shaped almost entirely by in-person interactions. Cliques were more defined. Crossing social boundaries was harder than it is today. I was one that I tried to get along with everybody. I definitely had my inner circle of friends, but I seem to have tentacles that reached into other friendship groups. And that's seen today with me, with who are still my friends and people that I'm in touch with. I think back to high school and a lot of them were in different cliques, but yet here we are today, all friends. Everything mattered. Optics mattered back in the 90s, where you sat at lunch, which section of the bleachers you occupied during games, which after-school activities you joined. There was little overlap between cheerleaders and chess club. Students who tried to float between groups often felt like outsiders to both. You had people that were labeled as tryhards for doing well in school, but then there were others seen as tryhards for trying to fit in where they quote-unquote didn't belong. I could remember that in high school, seeing one person hanging with a group that you just didn't think belonged there. But of course, everything's subjective. I don't think everyone fit the mold. I don't think I fit the mold in high school. I was an honor roll student. I played sports at least through sophomore year. It seems like once I got my camcorder, I stopped playing sports unless I was filming myself getting hurt. You had some cool students that were academic high achievers, though this was rarer, and it was often the girls. Although the overlap between cool and smart, it depended on the school size and the culture, where smaller schools, like where I grew up on Cape Cod, sometimes allowed for more overlap. I'm sure in larger schools in cities, those lines could be more rigid. For many, the choices made in high school stuck with them, at least for a while. Some of the cool kids found themselves struggling academically after graduation, maybe not even going to college, unprepared for the demands of going to college or just joining the workforce. Others who sacrificed their social lives for academics sometimes regretted missing out on those social experiences. Interestingly, reunions often blur those distinctions, as adult life tends to erase the rigid roles of teenage years, which is why I wanted to do this segment and get myself back into that headspace of being 15, 16 years old in the 90s. I didn't go to a ton of parties, but I went to a few. But in junior year, senior year, I always had things going on with my friends on the weekends or after school. For me, looking back, I have no regrets as far as my social circle goes. There's nobody I was friends with in high school that I regret being friends with, because the majority of them are still my friends now. And there's nobody really in high school that I look back at and say, I wish I had known them. Whether you were chasing popularity or straight A's, the choice often felt like an either-or proposition. And those decisions still shape how many of us Gen X or elder millennials remember their youth. So if I haven't drummed up enough memories for those of you that grew up in the 90s, I figured I would give you some examples from pop culture. These were some of the cool kids that were on TV or in movies in the 90s. You had people like Zach Morris from Saved by the Bell, who was always one step ahead socially but rarely ahead on his homework. You had Cher Horowitz from the movie Clueless, who was the queen bee of fashion and social life at Beverly Hills High. You had Dylan McKay from Beverly Hills 90210, just to make my sister Kate swoon. He was cool and rebellious and brooding. And there were others like Pacey Witter from Dawson's Creek or Jordan Catalano from My So-Called Life. On the other side, you had the academic achievers like Screech Powers from Saved by the Bell, or Lisa Simpson on The Simpsons, Andrea Zuckerman from Beverly Hills 90210. I just remember finding out that Andrea was 6, 8, 10 years older than some of the rest of the cast on the show, despite playing someone that was in high school. The rarer hybrids were still there, people that were cool and academically successful. I thought of someone like Brandon Walsh on 90210, or Topanga Lawrence from Boy Meets World, or Lainey Briggs from She's All That. It's interesting to look back at not just the 90s, but your high school experience, what you thought was cool, because it all comes back to things being subjective based on your experiences. My definition of cool in the 90s was grunge music, torn jeans, flannel shirts, backward hats, a good pair of Vans or Airwalks, TV shows like The Simpsons, Beavis and Butthead, more goofy frat boy comedies like Tommy Boy, Billy Madison, and yes, Wayne's World. I mentioned it earlier. I guess you could say that as I got further into high school, I drifted more into the preferring social interactions over academics. I do regret that a little bit because I took a semester off after I graduated high school, and once you get out of that cycle of school, it's really hard to get going again. I ended up getting a 2-year degree from college, but it was like pulling teeth. Once I got that taste of freedom, it was hard to put me back into that box of going to school, especially college where you had to pay for it. But this is all just my own opinion, my own experience. What was it like for you going to high school in the 90s, 80s, 70s? Maybe you're still in high school now. Are you torn between being cool and doing well in school? I think that's a battle that will always rage. I'll make sure to discuss it with my fellow class of 96 graduates next year at our 30-year reunion. Oh, God, just to end it on some tears from me. But I'll wipe those tears away and say, until next week, that's going to wrap up episode 210 of the In My Footsteps podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for making it to the end. I hope you enjoyed your weekly dose of Gen X nostalgia. The train does not stop rolling just because summer is unofficially over. Next week is episode 211, and oh boy, is it loaded. We're going to look back at the debut of ESPN, the Total Sports Network, and its impact on pop culture since it came out in 1979. We're going to celebrate 40 years of the Super Mario Brothers game for Nintendo. Ooh, I get to do a deep dive into Mario. There'll be a brand new top 5 as we look back at defunct supermarket chains. So get ready for all of that coming up next week on episode 211 of the In My Footsteps podcast. At the beginning of the show, I had said to stick around because I had an announcement for my Patreon subscribers. I am finishing up my 10th book. You've heard me mention it before on the podcast. I had said I was holding back because I needed to buy an ISBN number for both the physical and ebook versions of In Their Footsteps, the interesting people, places, and events of Cape Cod history. It's an anthology history book, chronological order, 40 different stories. It's going to be published by me. I'm still not sure exactly when. I'm figuring it sometime this month in September. I'm going to self-publish. I'm going to create a landing page for it so you can go and see more of what it's about. How this ties into Patreon is that I'm going to figure out a way to give all of my Patreon subscribers the ebook version of this. I don't know exactly how. I'm figuring it's going to have to be something like emailing it to you. So don't worry about that. It'll be up to me to figure out how exactly to do this. But if you like Cape Cod history, it's coming. And you can get a physical copy. I've created the paperback version, but I figured the ebook is something that would be more fun and a lot easier to figure out. So that'll be coming up at some point. Maybe it'll be for the 2-year anniversary of me having a Patreon page, which is the beginning of October. Naturally, I will let you know when I know exactly what I'm doing. I think I did all right with my voice holding up, with my allergies that have been creeping up over the last few days. I don't think it was too noticeable. Of course, I said I was suffering from them, so I'm sure you could tell a lot more. But it's all good. I'd rather deal with my allergies while I'm still finishing up my vacation than trying to do work. I also tried hard to hide my overwhelming joy at my favorite time of year starting. I know not everyone likes fall. I know not everyone likes back to school time. For me, it's basically from the time my vacation starts at the end of August all the way through the end of the year through New Year's. It's my favorite time of year, but I will try not to rub it in too much for those who hate fall and hate having to go back to school or work or whatever you've got going on. If you enjoy my content, you can become a Patreon subscriber. You can get in under the wire to get a free ebook version of my new book. You can also buy me a coffee. I revamped that page. Links to both are in the podcast description. Please, if you can, donate or share the GoFundMe for When Henry Met Henry, my directorial debut short film. My friend, producer Frank Durant, he's got me. I'm still not sure if I'm going to be a director or a producer. I just know it's more into what I had wanted to do from high school. That's why I bought that camcorder. We've still got 5 weeks where the fundraiser will be up. We've done really well so far. I'm thrilled with the reception it's gotten. I'm so thankful and blessed for the friends and family that have donated and shared, the complete strangers that have donated and shared. If you can't donate, sharing means just as much because maybe someone sees what you shared and they donate. Find me all over social media. You will see loads of links to the GoFundMe. I'm all over Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can see my recent short video where I caught a double rainbow near Bass River on Cape Cod. Check out my blog, which it's at blogger.com through Google, but I'm debating moving it over to Substack. I'm still trying to figure that out. Whatever you're doing, wherever you're listening from, I hope it's the best day, the best week possible. Remember, summer's not done yet. You've still got a few more weeks, so get out and enjoy it. I'll keep on pumping out the content, whether it's the podcast or YouTube videos or Patreon exclusives or blogs. I'm always doing something. I tried and pretty much failed to have one day on my vacation that I didn't do any work, but that's fine. I enjoyed it. I hope you do too. And remember, in this life, don't walk in anyone else's footsteps. Create your own path and enjoy every moment you can on this journey we call life, because you never know what tomorrow brings. Thank you all again for tuning in. This has been the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterland. You already knew that. And I'll talk to you all again soon.